The reality of being a teacher is making sure your door can quickly lock in case there's an active threat. It's having a window cover you can quickly pull down. Loving natural sunlight but having to pull down your window cover so no one can see inside your classroom. Making sure your safe place is always clear and accessible in the case an active threat happens during your conference or lunch. Creating a plan for your students but knowing there are so many, well, what if they came in this way, or how can I hide 20 plus kids and keep them quiet when they're afraid? Heck, I'm afraid as I was never trained for this. Creating a plan but knowing it may not even be of use as you or the kids can easily be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's feeling guilty and sad that you get to finish the rest of the school year with all of your students, but there are teachers who won't be able to do the same, parents that won't be able to do the same. Being a teacher and student is scary right now, and it doesn't have to be this way.
That was Taylor Mora, a Texas educator who took to TikTok to share the side of being a teacher that most people don't see. Quick locking doors, blackout curtains to obscure a shooter's view into a classroom, memorizing entrances and exits, in a desperate effort to save as many children as possible. This is not a story from a war zone. This is a reality lived every day by teachers in America. But in a dystopian country where our classrooms have become war zones, our educators are now involuntary frontline troops in a deadly conflict.
The state of Texas has guardian laws, they have martial laws, which empower school districts to make choices about whether they want to train people in their own schools to be ready, because clearly law enforcement can't be everywhere.
Mora's video went viral in a nation still processing the senseless mass murder of 19 students and 2 teachers in Uvalde, Texas on May 24th. The video has since been viewed over 8 million times, drawing comments from viewers who don't understand how teachers can be asked to do such psychologically traumatizing work, yet are paid near poverty wages. And sadly, many comments came from other teachers, not to vent the anger and frustration they're feeling, but to ask Mora where they could buy some of the safety equipment that she demonstrated in the video.
I don't know how to do this. A bullet missed my daughter by 2 feet today. You want to know how? I know, because we're driving down the highway in the middle of Washington, rural Washington, and all of a sudden something like smacks. And it sounds like I blew a tire. Pull over, and I'm like looking, and I can't find any tire. And then I see it. I see the bullet hole in the, I see the bullet hole in the door of our van. On my side, right behind me, right below my daughter. And I can't believe it. See the bullet hole in the side of the door? See my kids sitting there? Of course we called the cops. We called the cops right away. Then I heard a second shot. And when I heard the second shot, I thought, oh, this is an active shooter situation. I need to get out of Dodge. So I hop back in the car, drive to where it's a safe distance, hop back out of my car. I get out of my car and I hear more shots go off. And I'm like, what the heck? So we called the cops. Cops showed up, all of that. Found out because a sheriff showed up. The sheriff shows up, and I told him which direction the bullets came from because there was 5 more shots after that. And he went and found the guy. Guess what he was shooting? An AR-15. Yeah, there's a police report, and they found the guy, but they can't prove it was his bullet. And the other detective was like saying that it's this, like it could have been someone else. And I'm like, oh, I gave you the fragments, but I know that's not like you can't get any like rifling unless I had the whole bullet. Like I understand, I'm not a dimwit, but whatever.
So this experience that this TikToker by the name of Built from Junk had is very telling because it encapsulates much of what is wrong with the United States. First and foremost, there's this culture around guns that treats them like they're toys. Somebody in the area, it seemed, was just wildly firing off an AR-15 just for fun, which is something that apparently people think is appropriate to do, especially when there's like a highway nearby that this guy was driving on, and it almost hit one of his kids. Now this happened the day before the 4th of July, which I think we can all understand the timing on this and like why it would happen at this time. There are tons of Americans that just love shooting guns into the air. But then the response from the police is also really telling. The fact that they're like, oh, there's not really much we can do. We can't really prove that it was this guy in particular. I mean, we can't really help you. Because the reality is, when somebody's running around with guns, or they're threatening violence, or they're an extreme right-winger, the reality is when the police interact with those types of people, police empathize more with those types of people than they empathize with the people who are potentially victimized by their willful negligence or the outright malicious behavior that they are engaging in. We see this countless times where whenever Proud Boys are running around the streets like they did in Boston, you see police officers protecting them, not protecting the community from a literal Nazi group, which, by the way, has been recognized as a terrorist group by New Zealand. No, instead of protecting the community from those people, the police find it to be their job to protect those people from the community. And then when you have somebody wildly firing their gun into the air, you have the police bending over backwards to be like, oh, well, we can't really prove it's this guy, so what are we gonna do? And this just goes to show that these two things need to be paired together. A lot of Democrats like to run around and they point about the guns. And they're like, oh, the guns are the problem, guns are the problem, guns are the problem. And guns are a really big problem. Americans have this terrible culture when it comes to guns where they just want to treat guns like toys. But we also have a problem where we have an institution of policing that the Democrats continue to increase funding for, that the Democrats continue to push for and defend publicly. They do tons of pro-cop propaganda, who fundamentally, at the end of the day, are the same types of people who are obsessed with guns, and also tend to sympathize more with outright white supremacists than basically anybody else. And then when you consider the fact that something around 40% of police officers are domestic abusers, you can see that they also tend to empathize with the abusers instead of the victims of abuse. This is the fundamental problem that we are having. Fundamentally, at its core, the police are a white supremacist institution that have no interest in public safety, and they have no interest in preventing crime. Fundamentally, anybody that pretends that you can only deal with one of these things and still everything will work, that if you can just get rid of the guns, then everything's going to be fine, is failing to see the problem for what it is. And this is why it's so infuriating to see the Democrats constantly running around to tell everybody to vote. Vote, 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 vote. Just like when somebody was victimized at a shooting on the 4th of July, some writer for the Huffington Post came in and said, hey, don't forget to vote. Don't forget to vote. Somebody was literally just tweeting about how they were literally the victim of a mass shooting on the 4th of July, who was in Illinois, by the way. They are already voting for Democrats. Illinois already has a Democratic state legislature and governor, and Chicago already has a Democratic city council and mayor. They have voted for all of the Democrats they can possibly vote for. So when you go to people who are the victims of these institutions and you tell them to vote, what you are effectively doing is telling them that you do not care about what is happening to them, that you think that they should have the patience to wait once every 2 or 4 years to have their voice heard, except where it's not heard, because the people who do get elected aren't doing anything. Democrats literally have their representation. They have the House and the Senate and the presidency, and they're still not doing anything, and they're still responding to everything by just telling people to vote. And it is absolutely pathetic, because the harsh reality is that unless we are fundamentally going to address these issues, unless we are fundamentally going to address the fact that the police are failing, unless we fundamentally address the fact that the whole idea of policing is fundamentally flawed, that we do not have a system of public safety, we have a system of public oppression, we have a system of violence that incarcerates people, we are fundamentally not going to deal with any of the problems that we have. It turns out that forcing people into slavery is a pretty miserable solution to crime. It turns out that when it comes to dealing with crime, you actually need to have community support and community involvement. If somebody's wildly shooting guns off into the air, it seems like the best type of institution to have would be something that could peacefully check up on that person on a regular basis to make sure that they're not doing that. Instead of, a police officer who will show up, who will maybe file some paperwork for your insurance, but then after that tell you that they can't really do anything. It's not that everybody that does this, that shoots guns wildly into the air, should be immediately put in prison. That's not fundamentally going to change their behavior. But you can bet that if they've got members of their community who are literally there to check up on them and make sure that they're aware of the impact that their actions have on other people, if maybe there was some sort of reconciliation process where people like that were actually forced to meet the children who were almost killed by his actions, then maybe perhaps that might change their behavior. And then after that, if that fails, then we can have like a whole nother conversation. But without basic cultural institutions and social institutions that actually serve to change the minds of people who are doing things like this, we are not going to fundamentally address the problems. As long as our response is to send in a police officer who has the mindset more of the person who's firing guns wildly than of the person who is thinking about their children, then we are not going to see any positive change in society. And in fact, we are going to see the opposite. Because what we're seeing right now are people committing random acts of arbitrary violence against groups of people all over the country. We are seeing waves of mass shootings across the country. And we are also seeing the types of people who commit those mass shootings being defended by the police whenever they march on the Capitol, whenever they march in any city. Outright, overt white supremacists find themselves on the same side as police officers, as opposed to finding a system of public safety that's actually willing to intervene in the behaviors of these people.